MEC, I'm now married. Okay. Yeah. We mustn't be too serious. MEC and I were together here at the university some years ago. But it tells you when you come here and some of your comrades have become MECs that you are an underachiever in life. You know. So, Program Director, thank you very much. The member of the Executive Council, the Provincial Cabinet of the Provincial Government of Limpopo, Kankaring Rakhwale, the representative of the executive of the district of the executive mayor, the mayor of Thulamela, and the members of your EXCO, and other councillors who serve in our local government system, the traditional leadership, the Honorable Judge of the Gauteng North High Court, senior managers of government from the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development, ladies and gentlemen, compatriots, Ndi Masiar, Bovwa, it's a great pleasure for us to be here to participate in this discussion. And an unfortunate discussion in the sense that part of the reason why we have to come here and spend 2 hours to have this discussion is because of something that will be a surprise to many other nations or to many countries, that the men of this country, wherever they met, I don't know whether in a conference or in a convention, decided to declare a war against women, girls, and children, which is very unfortunate. To have the commander-in-chief of the nation, the president, declare GBVF a pandemic, that means that that's a serious challenge for all of us men, because one way or the other, as the judge was saying, we cannot find a solution to this pandemic unless men and boys are enlisted in the war against this pandemic and this scourge. You know, South Africa has become a very unsafe place for all of us, including me as a man. I don't feel safe to walk at night. But what more of women and girls? We can't sleep with our windows open, even if we're a group of men in the same house. We'll want to make sure that the doors are closed, the gates are locked, and so on and so forth. What more of women and girls of this country? Now, the judge has mentioned this point in passing, and the temptation will be for us to accept that it is known that it is part of the problem. But this animal called patriarchy, I'm a beneficiary of it, and many of you seated here as men were the beneficiary of this system. And actually it is in our interest that the system doesn't collapse, because it continues to favor us. In fact, even me making the point that, you know, I'm an underachiever, but think about it. The MEC, to be where she is today, she had to jump many hurdles, the same as the judge, than those that I had to jump. I didn't have to fall pregnant, even though we go around and say, we are expecting, we are pregnant. So it's a solidarity, but which you know. But the point is that we never have to experience that for 9 months. So in a working life of a woman for the 20 years or 25 years, you have to check the number of years. If there are 3 children, it means for 3 years at least as a start before you get into the first 6 years that you raise a child. that they cannot focus on capacitating themselves, they cannot build their capacity, and so on and so forth. And we continue as men. So this is the reality that we have to face. You know, political analysis always say the same approach that we look at racism. That's the same way we should look at patriarchy. Now, and you see, men are smart. Men rarely defend patriarchy, but we deploy women to defend patriarchy. Majority of times, patriarchy is defended by women. And just that fact as a tactical approach, we then make a point that the women themselves prefer that the system continues as is. And patriarchy, you know, with whatever cultural convictions, practices that we never question where they come from, and we take them as if they were always divinely declared by God, that it has to be this way. And I'm glad that the judge made reference to Section 9 of the Constitution, equality before the law for all of us. Because as a country we're a constitutional democracy, and this is the system that we chose, that we are all equal. Our biological makeup and our physical appearance cannot determine how the law treats us. So the rule of law means that whether you're a man or a woman, you have to be treated the same. Now, patriarchy has created all this toxic masculinity, these inequalities. There's always a chance that in terms of the numbers, the equities and all of that, that men will always have the advantage over women. If you were to count nationally, how many directors general do you have that are female? The number will always be below that of men. If you were to check how many judges do we have, the numbers of women will always be below those of men. And many of us here, seated here, even men, whoever is there listening, we know this reality. That the general belief that people used to have, that for whatever the reason men were more intelligent and more gifted than women, is not true. We know even in classroom that many of us will never come close to the girls who were in our class in terms of performance. So, when BMF here, Chairperson, you arrange meetings of this nature, which is very important. It's very important that we also deal with the social context. And that's why part of what we must do as part of our programs is to also engage the communities on the ground, the traditional leadership and councils, as well as the traditional and cultural institutions. Because if we don't take the battle there, we are not going anywhere. We need a battle to be taken there, and we need this to be understood. And my starting point, maybe some years ago when I was still young and I didn't have my daughter, or my daughter was not growing up now as being 15, some of these issues will not have been much of a concern to me. But now it goes beyond the concern for my daughter and my wife. I have to think about my mom, my sisters, and my aunties, and always have to wonder where they are and what will happen to them when they walk the South African streets. Now, I was given some statistics here. In the Toronto area, I'm advised that we have 2,400 cases that are enrolled, that are GBVF related. Now that tells you a story. And you can imagine that the statistics are not necessarily a true reflection of what happens on the ground, because not all cases are reported. There are many other dynamics that come in, the distance between the police station and the court, that's one. But the second dynamic where, because a lot of these crimes happen in an intimate family settings, where because this is uncle, is well known, is rich, and he has done this, you will embarrass the family if you go and report. So these matters should not be reported. So we have to look at that number and extrapolate and say the situation could even be more worse. So that's the one part. But the second part is that there's been an increase during the COVID lockdown, during your hard lockdown, generally in the country, by 76% of general GBVF-related matters. Second, statutory rape increased by close to 3%. Statutory rapes, rape children, people who are less than, what is that age? 13. Less than 18. That's a statutory rape. So that's why anyone who is pregnant below the age of 18, any neighbor or all of us here must look for the perpetrator who committed a crime, because that's a statutory rape. Now, child pregnancy, we all know, increased by 60%. Then that tells you, if we are saying child pregnancy increased by 60%, it means something about statutory rape. Because the law doesn't recognize the consent that a man will claim got from that child. Because that child, by law, will not be recognized to have the capacity to consent to sexual intercourse. Rape during that period increased by 22%. I will imagine that percentage as well will include even marital rape. Something which we have to face as well, because generally in African cultures, you can never talk about the marital rape. Some years ago, when Roman Dutch law was still a big issue in our South African law studies, there was this assumption, was a presumption on assumption that when you are married, you are presumed to have permanently consented to sex. And we did away with that nonsense because it's not true. There still has to be consent. That's why there is marital rape. And you can imagine that part. So when we talk about this 22%, it refers to that. Now, the declaration of the summit, the presidential summit on GBVF, calls on the whole of society, government, political leaders, and people in business. And that's why it's very heartwarming to have the BMF and its leadership from the province and locally arrange meetings like this, because the call from that declaration is that all of us must be involved in the fight against GBVF. Now, I don't want to take much time. The MEC will deal with a number of the issues. But from our part, looking at the fact that we also have to deal with corporate. By the way, Program Director, I have an open door policy. So my office, but there are people who don't like it because they, whatever they want privacy to raise their issues. So, but my policy is that my door remains open. So they don't have to close it when they go in. They close when they leave. So any visitor who comes, then we have to open the door. Now, we have started a program called Justice Men's Forum. We are mobilizing the men in the Department of Justice to be part of the war against GBVF. Because we think it's very important in all respects to have the men from the department involved. One, we have to deal with issues of sexual harassment in the workplace. And secondly, part of what we are trying to do is to mobilize each other to say, let's call each other out. We mustn't wait for anyone else to do it, but we must call each other out ourselves. In one meeting, I was telling these colleagues that I was in the bank the other time, and there was this guy who was busy shouting and screaming at his wife. But the next guy was there, stood up and said, you stop this nonsense. You are not going to do it here in the presence of my daughter. He said, stop it. It's your wife you are shouting at, but you are doing that in an open and public space in the presence of my daughter. And that's what we need to do. As men, call each other out. When we see a woman passing, we start whistling. Someone will say, no, but that's nonsense. You can't do that. The taxi ranks in this country are a very unsafe space for any woman. You wouldn't want your sister or your mom to go and work in a taxi rank in this country. Because it does look like a group of men where they are gathered to just become hyenas who are at any point willing just to devour women and girls. Now, this is going to be a long battle, but we have to face it. Because we will be betraying the vision of our beautiful constitution. This South Africa will not be belonging to men and women, it will be belonging to men who, due to their masculinity and their physique, then can roam the streets freely. Think about that someone has to lose the job because the person gets harassed and may well feel. There are cases where a person may just, even without anyone saying don't go back to work, but it may just feel like, I would rather be out of this environment, even if it means my children will have to starve. So we are having that discussion as men in the department. And part of what we are doing is that any man in the department who will be found to be involved in GBVF, that will be considered a dismissible misconduct. Even before the court deals with that matter and finalizes it, but from a department's point of view, we are adopting a zero tolerance. And as a matter of fact, we have said to the men in the department, we're giving them until August to even deal with general matters like maintenance. That any official of the Department of Justice who has a maintenance order against them, child maintenance order, and they don't pay it, they're going to be charged and be kicked out of the department. Because that's another form of violence, failing to maintain our own children. We go around distributing seeds all over and say, a man eats different, what. Make children all over the place. And then don't maintain those children. Then SASSA must come in and take care of your very children that you have created. And then take responsibility. Because we all know sex is not only recreational, it's also procreational. Now, the moment that is done, you then have to expect that there will be a child. And as a result, MEC, that's why you and the department, your department general, you have to be strict about this. Many guys are not paying maintenance and they depend on SASSA. And your system somehow is not picking up this issue. So that's why I think our cooperation is very important, that we look into the system and say, we will not pay any SASSA grant to a father that is working. We're trying to work on the system to make sure that even men who are employed in the informal sector, particularly the taxi drivers, because somehow it's like to prove that you're a good taxi driver, you must make children and not take care of them. The hawkers, those that are not in the system, we are trying to find a way to make sure that we reach them. Because it's very important that they maintain their children wherever they are. Because we end up raising the same kids in that kind of an environment where they are not taken care of. We have a problem of absent fathers in this country. So these are the things that as men in this country, even with the under the dialogues, initiatives, we have to talk about. And say, these children that we make all over, we leave them by themselves. They grow up without anyone mentoring them, without anyone role modeling, without anyone guiding them. And they just think that it's a survival. And when they come back tomorrow and become perpetrators of gender-based violence and femicide crimes, we get surprised. But because men are never available. And this discussion has to be had even in churches. We have to have it even in churches. In places of worship, we must have this discussion. Because it must be an embarrassment for any South African of goodwill that GBVF is called a pandemic in this country. Every day. Just that incident we're talking about. You rape a 15-year-old, then you gouge her eyes out. Why? The amount of violence. I still just can't understand it. Whatever that you were doing to this person, it's not acceptable. But at least let her go. Why is it so easy to want to kill and inflict more damage beyond any comprehension? What's the problem? The other time we came here 2 years ago when Judge were at Makwarela for the event there, we were told there's this problem as well in the region of abuse of one substance that apparently is meant for old elderly people, but somehow young people have an access to it, called Mpesu. So this is what men must discuss and say, but why do we have this Mpesu accessible to young men who are not married and end up then when they've taken this Macheu from the taxi rank? And I remember when we were students here who come to ShopRite, you'll see men in suits going to buy Macheu, and I left this place without testing that Macheu. But we must discuss that and say, why is it so accessible? It cannot be, because if we know then it's accessible and it creates these problems. Now, you know we have done amendments of the law to strengthen the fight from the legal part. But the law itself, as my sister you were saying here, the program director, someone was sentenced to 20 years, well and good. They did 10 years, then they qualify for parole. Now, for the person who is a victim, 10 years is a short period of time. The person is back in society. But this is the point we must always know. That's why we moved away from prisons to correctional services. In our area, life sentence used to be called Dilika jail. And I always tell them and said, Dilika jail is no more. Even if you are given life sentence, at some point you will come out. It might be that you'll do 20 years, 25 years, then you come out. But the idea is that people must be rehabilitated when they are in prison. Now, so the law has changed. The more critical things that we must, at least even from a domestic violence point of view, that we, you're raising this issue, in corporate, you're an employer, you can now go and report out of interest that I've seen someone's wife who has blue eyes. They still call blue eyes those things that people have. That this person is being abused. And no one will question your standing and say, but what's your standing? Your standing is that you are the employer and you have seen that someone is not being abused at your workplace, but is abused from home or wherever. So you have a right to do that. You know of a child who's being abused and the family tries to protect the matter and you know about it. You have an obligation to go and report. Because if it is later found that you knew, you can be held accountable before the law for having known that there was a perpetration of GBVF and you didn't do anything about it. Now, so there's that creation of obligation for all of us who know to report. But also there's an expansion of the registration of those that are convicted of sexual offenses. So that any place or institution that deals with vulnerable groups, the elderly, the disabled, and children up to 25, those who work in those areas will have to be cleared from the register. Someone has to first check whether they are not having a record of sexual offenses. We know what happens. We were all once young at university. That the senior students, sometimes even employees in universities, They prey on the young. And in fact, the age of university has dropped now. You have 15, 16-year-olds arriving at university from far away. Arrive here, and you know, if you came from Bushbuckridge like me, you're taking, I can't remember how many taxis, 4 taxis. Arrive here is 5 p.m. The offices are closed, there's no accommodation. Then the senior ones, they give themselves the opportunity to choose whichever girl they can choose. So it's a serious issue. That's why the National Register of Sexual Offenders will be very, very important from June, and the expansion thereof. That those people who are working, even in the universities, in those areas where there will be vulnerable people, they will have to be checked whether they are not in the system. If they are in the system, therefore they can't take those jobs. So the primary, what are these called, the ECDs, the Early Childhood Development Centers, will have to check. And the employers will have to bear responsibility for making sure that whoever they appoint there doesn't have a record of sexual offenses. Because you can't employ, scavengers like that and bring them closer to children. We have declared this year the year of the community. We want to engage the community, the South African community, on justice matters. All the judges, the magistrates, the prosecutors will be with us on the ground to talk about these matters and talk about accessing the system. But MEC, the point the judge was raising is very important. The issue of backlog. This requires all of us. You are social workers. I sit there all the time. I go to the portfolio committee, I get lambasted. But these problems are caused by you. And I have to account. If you are social workers, I thought you would give her a notice. She admitted to not doing reports on time. If the different stakeholders don't come together, it's easy for police further investigation, your worship. Really? A matter that is known, we have 5 witnesses who have come forward, they've made statements, but somehow further investigation. When we're doing a breakdown of what causes case backlogs, the biggest proportion, the majority, is further investigations. So we have to have this conversation with the police. What are you investigating? 3 times per week you go to the victim's house. But you made a statement. We told you what happened. So you're coming back to, what are you looking for? You see, so these are the issues that will require all of us in an integrated and synergized manner from at least the justice system to deal with these matters. Because sometimes some of these cases, there are people who, the incident happens 5 years ago. Now trial is ready to begin. And they just tell you as witnesses, you know what? I was not even married. I now have a husband. He doesn't even know about this thing. But now you are looking for me to come and testify. And this is the reality. And then you're going to have a, miscarriage of justice. Because no one wants now suddenly, this was 5 years ago, they just said, I've moved on. But is it fair to that person? Because we have not delivered justice to that person. Has this person really moved on? So as part of that, we'll sign this MOU with BMF, and we'll be happy, MEC, as well, with your department and other stakeholders to have this understanding so that we can all of us go to the ground, talk to the people of this country about their rights in the Constitution, but talk to them about the recourse that they have. The reality is that we see this part where the crimes are committed, but the amount of trauma. I was telling my wife the other time that I'm no longer comfortable listening to news stations when we're driving with my children. Because the reporting about, there's nothing wrong with the reports, but you are always guaranteed, if you are driving from, Gauteng to Bushbuckridge, that for hours, you are guaranteed that you will hear news reporting a rape, a killing of a woman or girl, 5 times in that journey. And I always wonder what goes through my daughter's mind when she hears about these things. So our daughters, our girls at home, the amount of trauma knowing that this place is not safe. So my commitment, and at least in our workplace, we're saying we're calling for men who should enlist in the army that is going to fight against the GBVF. And I think that's what all of us, we're happy BMF, you are willing to come on board to work with us, to say, let's fight this and let's stand up. This will mean in many ways, in our private spaces, in News Cafe, in Capello, wherever we're sitting, and say we can't allow the objectification of women. And we have to stand up and talk to each other and say, if you know anyone who does abuse, we have to take responsibility and call them out. Thank you very much.